This conference will now be recorded.
Just a second, Chief.
Sure.
We just want to welcome anyone joining us tonight.
Presenters.
We just wanted to make sure to acknowledge anybody that is.
So the work session tonight, the work session meeting for April 20th, 2022 at 6:30 is regarding the police department. We wanted to provide the council with a different additional information. Some of that information you're going to hear tonight is we're going to have John Walters from Public Safety Testing, who's the president and co-founder. Public Safety Testing is the company we use to do recruitment and test our applicants for entry-level police officer. They also do promotion processes, and they do things like executive searches and background investigations, and also internal affairs investigations. So they do a broad amount of work for all kinds of different fields. John Walters is a former police chief. He was a police chief for 7 years, and I believe his company's been around about 20 years. So he's very knowledgeable, and it's a good chance for you to ask questions regarding the employment picture in law enforcement. We're going to follow that up by risk management, legal opinion from David Force. And this has got to do with the liability regarding different scenarios that have been discussed over the last 12 to 18 months regarding contracting out law enforcement services. And then finally, we're going to present a financial forecast of the city budget and the police department budget, and that'll be done by city staff. If you're wondering where Jeff Swanson is, he's going to be a little late. He had a flat tire on the freeway, and the mayor's running late from another appointment. So both of them are en route, and as soon as they get here, they can take over the meeting. Any questions? Okay. John Walters will be the first one to present then.
Thank you, Chief. Hey, is there a way that I can be made a presenter so that I can share my screen, please?
If you'd like, you could email it over and we could share it. At the moment, we don't have that ability.
Oh my goodness. Well, I
John,
guess
if you can read his address, you can email it directly to her, and she's sitting next to us, and she can put it on the screen.
Okay, well, I'm just going to need a couple minutes then. And then will she have to control it then? That will be...
Yes, that's how we'll do it.
Okay. So just to confirm, as the admin, you don't have a way to make others a presenter, is that correct?
Not in this system.
That's correct, not in this system currently.
Okay.
We just barely got the internet.
Okay. So who do I send this to?
Do you have Maria's email from the city administrator? She emailed you probably about a week or so ago. She's the one that gave you the information on the website login. Maria?
if we all wanted to be guinea pigs, see if it works.
Well, unfortunately, they're saying the file is too big, which
Okay,
which
we're gonna test having them.
that hasn't
John, I'm
happened.
going to give you presenter abilities, and then if it causes issues on our end, we'll just stop. But I'm going to give it a go.
Okay.
We just moved in this building, so everything's kind of new.
It's just going to look
Okay.
weird.
Well, it's working for me. How about you folks?
We see you. Everyone's just going to see my mute
Uh,
button. But
There you go.
so is this
You're on.
okay? Well, thank you. I should have attended rehearsal today, I guess. So, well, good evening. So, my name is John Walters, and I'm with Public Safety Testing. And thank you, Chief, for the good introduction. And what I want to do is, what I understand that you're doing is trying to get a good feel about what the state of police recruitment and hiring is right now, the many challenges that we're faced with, the timeline that it takes to hire, as you make some considerations and evaluations about moving forward with how the city's going to move forward. So what I'm going to do, talk a little bit about what we do for you, as well as talk about some trends that are going on, not only regionally, but nationwide. This is a real significant issue right now in policing. Our mission is to support you and support public safety agencies in their goal to hire and develop great employees. And we have the privilege to work with many state, county, and city police departments, fire departments, corrections departments, and 911 centers to help them hire first responders. And tonight I'm just going to address real quickly some national trends that we're seeing, some regional trends, talk about the testing and hiring process that's unlike any hiring process you may be familiar with, and then talk about the timelines that it takes to hire these folks. So quickly, some national trends that are going on. As you know, law enforcement is really being challenged right now. I started in this business 40 years ago, and in the last 40 some years, I have never seen the challenges that we are faced with now in terms of recruitment and hiring and retention, not only in law enforcement, but in corrections. Corrections officer recruitment and hiring is a challenge. There's a nationwide shortage of dispatchers, as a story talked about on ABC, and fire departments are having challenges as well. And that's a barometer for me. When fire departments are having a challenge hiring folks, then I know that it truly is a real challenge. So you couple all of that, and what contributes to it, of course, you've got a global pandemic. We're now 2 years and plus. And then you have the tragic George Floyd incident that really sparked a closer examination. It sparked riots. It sparked a defund the police movement. And from a recruitment standpoint, defunding the job you want to get into, it makes it even more difficult to recruit as well. And so unemployment rates, when we look at unemployment rates across the US, it's interesting that 2 months or the month before COVID hit in March, we had one of the lowest unemployment rates in modern history in the US. And then it spiked to about 15% in April of 2020. But now it's gone back down dramatically. And the most recent unemployment figures show 3.6 nationwide. There's never been this many job openings nationwide. Right now, there's 11.3 million job vacancies nationwide. There are not enough people to fill them. And so this makes recruiting, regardless whether you're recruiting for Boeing, the city of La Center, Amazon, anything, it makes recruiting incredibly difficult. And this number is always interesting to me, but right now, for every job opening, there's basically a half a person looking for that job or able to fill that job. The point being, there are more jobs than there are people looking for work. And so in our last challenge in recruiting was probably in the 08, 09 time period. You know, you had 3, 4, 5 people looking for every job that was open. And now it's just completely the opposite. And so not only do we have to recruit people that are looking for work, we have to try to recruit folks that are currently working in other jobs to get them interested in being a first responder. So it really is a challenge. Every day, we have all read the articles about all the job openings and all the nationwide issues. But it's not just first responders. There's a shortage of nurses. There's a shortage of bus drivers. There's a shortage of teachers. There's a shortage of pilots. Recently, in the last couple of weeks, we've seen all the flights that have been canceled merely because of the shortage of pilots. So that's kind of the national perspective in a very quick way. Regional perspective for you is that the challenges are similar. When you look at the unemployment rates in the state of Washington, our current rate is about 4.3% statewide. I see Clark County at 5.1. When you get up in the Puget Sound area, you're in the 2s. Economists typically look at a 3%, 3 to 4% unemployment rate as full employment. And so anytime you're approaching full employment, of course that creates challenges when you're trying to hire folks. US nationwide right now is 3.6. Your neighbors to the south is 3.8. So if you're trying to steal from Oregon, you're going to have a greater challenge. And if you're trying to steal from Idaho, it's going to be even greater because it's only 2.7 over in Idaho. Some of our customers in Idaho talk about unemployment as non-existent, really. They're down into the 1% range in some counties. The highest unemployment in modern history in the state of Washington was 16.8 in April, just as the pandemic began. And interestingly, the historical low was 2 months before that. And then today's sitting about 4.2, so we're back down to where we were pre-pandemic, if there is such a way to describe that. And when we look at the number of police applicants, 2017, in 2018, we had about a 6% increase. 2019, there was about a 1% decrease. Pandemic hits, and unemployment goes up, but the numbers of applicants go down. We were able to quickly pivot to virtual testing and some other methods to continue to test candidates. In 2021, we saw levels go back up to almost 2019 levels in terms of applicant numbers. Numbers don't necessarily equate qualified. Numbers don't necessarily equate to those that are going to pass the hiring process, but the numbers were back up in 2021. And now we're seeing a downward trend for the first quarter in 2022. And we're not quite sure yet whether this trend will continue, but the trend right now is a bit worrisome for this year, at least in the first quarter. So you couple that with what I call the triple threat, and that's fewer applicants that are interested in being first responders. You have incumbent police officers leaving their agencies for other agencies or public safety altogether. And then you've got the number of folks that were contemplating retirement, that the baby boomers that entered 20, 30, 40 years ago are retiring. And so you have this confluence of events that are occurring that that really create challenges that not only the city of La Center is faced with, you've got large departments faced with it as well. Perfect storm. You've got a pandemic, a narrative where it's not supportive of police. You have legislation that's viewed in our state by those in public safety circles, certainly not supportive. And applicants talk to me often about they wonder whether the state or the local folks are supportive of them in this career and things like that. Job openings are at record high, unemployment at record low, and we have the triple threat we just talked about, and candidates have tons of opportunity. And they are in control in this type of market, right? And so they have many opportunities. There is that issue from pay to benefits to guaranteed remote work versus having to go to the office. They just have a lot of choices in this environment. I want to talk about the screening process. The hiring process to be a police officer, or really any first responder, is unlike any other job. And it should be. It should be, because we ask so much of the men and women as first responders. There was a nationwide study years ago that looked at how long it takes to hire folks. And the average time to hire across all sectors was about 23 days. But what took the longest in the study, and it doesn't surprise me, were police officers. This study found that nationwide the average was about 125, 130 days just to hire police. And when you look at the hiring process, you can see why. So you've got this process by which you do some initial testing. Now, at public safety testing, we do the written exam for your candidates as well as the physical ability test. And then as soon as a candidate passes those scores are available to the city center basically that day. Many departments, this is the typical hiring process. I don't know if it mirrors exactly your city's process, but this is very typical in policing nationwide, frankly. So there's a written test, physical ability test, and interview process. In the state of Washington, a Civil Service Commission then certifies the list and put the top 3 candidates. So the chief might have the rule of 3 or whatever, put through background investigations, polygraph exam, psychological evaluation, a medical exam. And then we send them to a police academy. And then we bring them back and do field training. They're on probation, and the hiring process itself does not stop until that police officer is off probation. Every one of these steps are designed to advance people. Every one of these steps, by design, eliminate unqualified candidates. And every one of these steps is necessary in the sense that there isn't one of these steps that can identify the ideal candidate. I wish there were. I wish there was one thing we could do, but there isn't. Each one of these steps tells us something important about a candidate and their ability to do this very challenging job. And so it takes a long time to go through that process, and it should, right? We give a police officer a badge, a weapon. We give them the legal authority to take away what we as Americans value most, our life and our liberty. And they have the legal right to do that. So we have to get this right. It has to be done right when we hire them. That's one reason it takes so long. Just to give you an example of how long it takes. So if your city schedules the interviews to certify their list, some cities do that quarterly, Some do it twice a year. Some do it weekly. Some do it monthly. It takes staff time. It takes effort. It takes coordination. It takes time. But a number of cities do this, and a number of cities, frankly, have eliminated the oral board so that they could get a jump start on the process and do it later in our hiring process. Then the civil service certifies the list, and then the question is, how often do they meet? If they don't meet 6 weeks from now, do I have to wait 6 weeks before I start my background investigation on a candidate or not? I'm not familiar with what your procedures are, but there are many cities where that is delayed just to get a certified list. So this could take anywhere, best case scenario, 2-3 weeks. It could take 2-3 months. And then you send them to a background investigation, and a background investigation which is incredibly thorough, that we know just about everything about that candidate, their character, their background, their work history, what their bosses say about them, what their friends say about them, what their coworkers say about them. It's incredibly thorough, and it takes a long time. And then if they get through that part of the process, then you schedule them for a polygraph. It takes a week or two to get that schedule, get the report back. Same thing with the psychological evaluation. Then a medical. This is a medical exam to ensure that they meet the requirements of the state retirement system, and they can do the qualifications of what's necessary on the job. And then we send them to the academy. And the assumption here is that there's room at the academy, because many times you have to wait months before you even get someone into the academy. And then they go to the academy for 17 to 20 weeks. And then, assuming they graduate successfully, then we put them through a field training process where they get on-the-job training under the supervision of the field training officer. And so this entire process at its best takes 9 months and could take up to 16 months. So that's why if you hear folks describe that it takes a year to get someone hired and solo doing patrol, that's where the year comes from. So it takes 9 to 16 months, and that's assuming they pass every single one of these steps. If they don't, you go back to step 1 and start all over again. And so that's the timeline and the challenges. So just quickly in summary, unprecedented challenges right now, not only in the Pacific Northwest, but nationwide to hire police. And there's fewer applicants. More police are leaving the job than ever before. And there's also a lot of retirements going on. And then to fill those positions, it takes a year before you get someone on the road. And so I think I'll just stop right there and answer any questions if you have any.
Yeah, John, I do have one. This is hiring a new officer. What's the process for lateral moves?
Number one, the most difficult is getting them interested. The lateral pool is the most ideal pool, okay? The lateral pool is the smallest pool. And because think of being a lateral. I've been in a job, I probably have some seniority, I'm making some pretty good pay usually. And now I'm going to go somewhere where I might be at the bottom of the totem pole, and I'm going to be on probation again, etc. So number one, they've got to make that change. They've got to make that decision. And then you put them through a similar process where they go through a background. And I'll tell you what, we do a lot of background investigations, but encourage a very thorough background investigation on laterals because it's rarely that they're going there for the bonus. You might be trying to get away from something. And we've done some backgrounds where it generated an investigation back at the department on that employee. And so look very closely at that. But if you can get a lateral, of course, because you can eliminate the academy training at 20 weeks. You can eliminate some of this. You still have the state law requires you to do the polygraph and the psych. You still have your FTO program, but it's still probably modified. So you can cut this timeline significantly. But everybody is just like you, is looking for that lateral pool that is really, it's not out there. There was a time when the vaccine mandates drove some people out of, and then the legislation in Washington drove laterals away from here. And often they either went to, at least the research I've seen, they went to states where they viewed the legislation a bit more friendly to police. And they also went to communities by which they didn't, that their chances of getting involved in a critical incident, a shooting, or some other incident like that was minimized. And that might be an attractive thing for the center is that you don't have some of those things that some cities have every day they're dealing with, or every month they're dealing with an officer-involved shooting or something like that, right? So laterals are ideal if you can find the right one, but it's a challenge. It's a challenge.
So what was the average timeline on a lateral then?
Well, I can only guess on that one, but you're going to do a background for 6 weeks, and then you've got 8, 10. You've got field training at 10, 20. They might cut it in half, assuming all your stars line up. But yeah, that's a good question. Are there other questions I can answer? Okay.
This is Liz Cervini, and I guess I have a question about the academy itself. Is there a backlog on even getting
Yes.
new recruits into it?
Yes, and I don't know what the backlog is today. I know that the academy is working very hard to try to keep up with the demand. And to be honest with you, I know at a time it was months to get folks in, but I don't know what it is today. I don't know if Chief Richardson knows today, but I don't know what it is today.
So Casey, do you know what it is? You probably know quicker than anybody. I figure it's got to be 3 to 4 months maybe, or
Yeah, we just got real lucky at the county here recently. We have a new hire that we picked up 3 weeks ago or so. He was a corrections deputy, so a significant portion of this circle here was cut out because it was just an update. But he is not slated to start the academy until the middle of May, around the 17th. If you guys saw, there was a legislative package that passed to get the Criminal Justice Training Commission to run 22 academies this year and 26 academies next year, so in 2023. The problem with that, though, is they're having a very difficult time getting tax and instructors up there. So just because they have the funding for it doesn't mean that they're going to actually run those academies, because with all of the agencies that are shorthanded, they can't afford to send people to the academy to teach full time. So, and they've put that request out statewide. It's traditionally just been folks that are in that SeaTac, Burien, metro area that are instructors over there, but they're actually bringing people in from across the state to teach portions of it. So I'm not holding my breath that those 22 and 26 academies are going to occur.
And that's for entry level. And then we have the 2-week equivalency academies for laterals from out of state. And they've kind of have the same kind of problem too, is just the funding to have it. Number 2 is the instructors. But I've seen it as like the backlog prior to all this legislation and adding academy classes. You could wait 6 months for a slot. So that's why you saw bigger departments, especially like Clark County Sheriff or Vancouver, would hire somebody, hire them right away, and then they put them somewhere that they could work, as opposed to sitting on that applicant for 6 months, because then somebody else would come along from another agency, or they go across the river and get a job there and go to the academy much quicker. So it's everybody's kind of competing for the same body. So.
We have about 450 vacancies just in the Puget Sound area involved. 450 just in Puget Sound.
All right, was there anything else I can answer for anyone?
Doesn't look like it, John. I appreciate you your time. I know you're busy, and hope to see you again sometime.
No, this is my pleasure. And if there's anything that we can do to help or anything, please let me know. And if any of you folks have questions that you'd like to send my way, I'd be more than happy to. And good luck in your process. And if there's any way we can help, please let me know.
Thank you, John.
All right, take care.
Thank you. Okay, first of all, I want to apologize for being late. Sorry about that. But glad that I did in fact make it. So, and Jeff Swanson is having a similar problem. He's got a flat tire on I-5. So hopefully he's going to make it here before very long.
I'm listening in.
Okay, this must be David.
No, this is Jeff.
Sorry. Okay.
I'm roadside at 179th waiting for assistance to show up. So.
Okay. Okay, Jeff.
You want to take it, Mayor, and introduce the second?
I'm sorry, Chief.
You want to introduce the second?
Yeah, so we'll go ahead and move right. Our second guest this evening is Mr. David Force. David Force is an attorney that's done some risk analysis for us. And I guess he's on live. Do we have him? David, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, good evening, David. So yeah,
Good evening.
We're ready for you, and you're
Okay.
live. So please give us your presentation.
Thank you. As was said, my name is David Force, and I'm an attorney in Wenatchee. Our office has worked with the Association of Washington City for many years and has been providing legal assistance to cities like La Center. And in fact, I've had the opportunity to represent a couple of defendants from the city of La Center personally when they have been sued in the past. We were asked to provide a risk assessment as to 3 options that the city was looking at proceeding under as it related to its police department. First, contracting with Clark County Sheriff's Office. Number 2, contracting with the tribal police department for police services. And then 3, what's been commonly referred to as a hybrid model, where the city retains some of its law enforcement officers, but yet still contracts out for services with either the Clark County Sheriff's Office or the tribe. And each of these scenarios produced a slightly different result in the potential risks and exposures to the city of La Center. And what we focused on was looking at how the city of St. Louis Center might be be involved in litigation as a result of its law enforcement activities with each of these particular scenarios. The first scenario, which is very common in Washington, is that the county sheriff is contracted to perform police services in a smaller municipality. Where I'm from, Chelan County, our county sheriff provides all the services but for the city of Wenatchee here, for our cities here. This is commonly done for smaller cities, and it has the benefit to the city in this case of removing the budgetary constraints related to law enforcement activities, and potentially it does provide some reduction in insurance coverage. But from a legal standpoint, one of the things it does is it basically eliminates liability or potential limit liability for police activities within the city of La Center. So, for instance, if a county deputy does something and gets sued over it, it's the county's responsibility to defend and pay out any potential judgment or settlement on that. The city of La Center would not be involved in that. And that is fairly significant in whether or not the officer did anything wrong or did something significantly wrong. Either way, that could expose significant resources from the city related to its budget. The second option, which is contracting with the tribe, we did some research on that, and yes, it is perfectly legal, and there is a state statute in Washington that authorizes a tribal police department to perform police services within a municipality in the state of Washington. We have been unable to find any tribe that is actively providing police services in the state of Washington. So this would be what we believe is a first for the state of Washington. As part of the analysis we did provide a draft document for a draft contract for that police services agreement that was provided by the I believe it was the Sheriff's and Police Chiefs Association here in Washington that drafted that up. And so we provided that model policy for you to all look at if that was a choice you wanted to go down. Now, what are the potential risks of this type of an agreement? Well, one, the city and the tribe are going to have to spend a significant amount of time working on the fine points of that agreement. So uniforms, jurisdictional issues, legal authority that will have to be all determined in that contract. And that's going to be a significant amount of research and drafting that the city attorney on behalf of the city is going to be responsible for. And given how contentious those discussions become, could drag out quite a while. The most significant risk, though, is that as part of that agreement, it's highly likely that the tribe would not be interested in waiving its sovereign immunity. If I was a tribal lawyer, I would never recommend that they waive their sovereign immunity. And that might have an issue, that might create an issue with the city of La Center. The city could be exposed to a potential lawsuit in that you delegated your police authority to a sovereign nation, and you are preventing that person from seeking justice or seeking compensation in Washington state or federal courts here in Washington. That was the precise scenario with the jail. I'm sorry, I forget where it was, but it was up in the Tacoma area. that was housing inmates. And that was exactly what the cities there that utilized the tribal jail there faced in lawsuits brought when they utilized the jail services for the tribe. So that's the biggest unknown, is how a court would potentially expose the city to that type of litigation. The fourth and final option that was discussed was what was known as the hybrid model. This model, we believe, clearly has the most exposure to the city of La Center. In this particular scenario, you would keep, my understanding is, a chief, a sergeant, and a patrol officer, which is the current makeup of the police department, and then hire out to one of the other entities. Under legal theories that could be brought against a police department and a municipality are specific. There are specific claims that flow to the employer or the municipality in this particular case. Those are negligent supervision, negligent training, negligent retention, and negligent hiring type of claims that would all be based on the city of La Center's decisions in those areas. And those are irregardless of the officer's conduct. So that would be an independent cause of action against the city where the officer wasn't being sued. You also have Section 1983 federal liability, commonly referred to as the Civil Rights Act, that could be directed against the municipality itself. As the chief of police, there is specific liability for his or her action against the city. And there are other theories, ratification, for instance, which has been used to, for example, an officer goes out and utilizes excessive force in the arrest of a suspect. That, like everywhere else, is reviewed based on an internal investigation, and the chief of police says, nope, the use of force was in line with our policies and procedures, and there's no punishment to the officer. That decision can trigger liability on the part of the city just for ratifying the officer's actions. So in that scenario, you would be the actions of an officer who is not an employee of the city of La Center could trigger liability on behalf of the city of La Center. So in that scenario, you would be exposed to those type of allegations, or potentially, and you would also have the unfortunate financial burden of paying for your police contract with whatever agency, plus maintaining your own police department, and at the same time paying for insurance coverage for your police department through the Association of Washington Cities. So you wouldn't get any financial benefit from contracting out. So those are kind of the three scenarios we were asked to look at, outlining the potential risks to the city for liability purposes. Did anybody have any questions? Or
Yes, I do actually. With that third scenario that you gave us, the hybrid policy, option number 3, you made the statement that would be open to litigation and such. How is that any different than what we're doing now with interlocal agreements? Because we're having other officers come in, so are we at risk at that point?
it depends on how those interlocal agreements are drafted. Generally, the interlocal agreements are such that the agency in control is either responsible for the liability, or the agency that hired the individual officer is responsible. So it just depends on how those are drafted. Most agreements that I have seen in our practice It's the each agency is responsible for the acts of their own officers, and that's how they generally are. So if you had a Clark County Sheriff come down under an interlocal agreement and they did something, then it would be Clark County Sheriff's responsibility for the most part. And there would be some scenarios where that is different. For instance, if there was a standoff, let's say, and the chief of police was directing all of the Clark County sheriffs that came to assist and was in control of those sheriffs. Under that scenario, where the chief is directing specifically the actions of the outside agencies, there could be potential liability for the city.
So David, this is Bronson Potter. I'm the city attorney. We do have an agreement with the city of Ridgefield, where Ridgefield has the ability to provide us with coverage of patrol officers if the Ridgefield patrol officers are willing to take on that duty. The agreement provides that Ridgefield is responsible for the actions of their officers. The center is responsible for the actions of our own officers. We don't supervise the Ridgefield officers. The center, the only liability under that agreement that we have, besides the actions of our own officers, are if we have an ordinance that is determined to be unconstitutional. That's our ordinance and that's our liability.
So then how are we doing the overtime or the officers that we're bringing in from like Washougal or Camas and such then?
I'm not aware of any agreements that we have with Washougal or
So
Camas.
does that put us at risk then?
Yeah, we have agreements with, I'm sorry, we have agreements with Washougal, the Sheriff's Department, and Ridgefield.
Is this a mutual aid agreement?
No, we have the special event agreement, very similar to the one we had with Ridgefield. And it's pretty clear on all those agreements, like what you said, Mr. Bronson, is they follow their policies. It's their officers following their policies under their supervision. So we don't provide any supervision to their officers. It's up for the city of Ridgefield to provide the supervision for their officers.
So help me understand then why you're saying that's the highest risk possible out of the options if we're already doing stuff like that. Because from what I'm hearing, the contracts can actually have it wrote in there.
Yeah, the interlocal agreements can have it written in there, and that's generally the way it is. But under the hybrid policy, you would have, it was my understanding that the chief would exercise supervisory control over whatever agency came into the city of La Center.
Is that per an RCW that we have to go that route?
No, it's a general practice that your chief would supervise the officers that are working for you, and we would have absolutely no control over if they engaged in misconduct. We can't do anything about that. So there's the problem. We don't have any authority over them. And if we do, then it has to match whatever the county is doing. And you're in a labor problem here. In addition to that, the unions are not going to agree that an outside jurisdiction can take action against a police officer who engaged in misconduct. It's just not going to happen. So it's many bridges that would have to be crossed in that scenario. We don't supervise the officers that are working overtime. They're doing what they do as police officers and are authorized to do in the state of Washington. But that's it. They don't take on any additional responsibility.
So whose policies do they fall under then?
They fall under their employer's policies.
So the city of Camas's policies are overseeing their officers when they're here in La Center?
That's right.
Okay.
There's the issue. And again, that's also a labor issue as an FYI.
Right.
And I just want to be clear too, that for the record, that Camas is not involved. Washougal is.
Sorry.
I just want to make sure that
I
I don't want Camas to get upset at us. But yes, thank you.
So I have another question, David.
Sure.
You said that in the state of Washington, there is no precedent set right now that the policing is being done by the tribe into other cities at this point. Is there any anywhere in the US that's doing this that we can model after or even have the option to look into?
We weren't able to find anything. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Like I said, there's an actual RCW statute on this type of agreement. So the legislature for Washington has authorized it. And like I said, I provided a model policy for that for you to look at if that was a road you guys chose to do. But I haven't found anybody specifically in Washington that has contracted with the tribe.
And I didn't hear anybody talk about insurance. Is there problems with our insurance?
That would be about
That's what it would be.
Yeah, and the problem with the tribal situation, the problem with the tribal situation is in other scenarios, not specific to law enforcement, but business adventures and all the rest of it, the tribes always go to their federal sovereignty, and then they don't want to play with the state. So if it's advantageous for them, then that's fine. If it means they have to accept the liability, they don't want it because they're a federal agency and they do what they want. I will also tell you, federal policing or tribal policing is very different because their philosophy on tribes is we're going to get this guy back anyway, so we're not going to punish them and take the action if they're on tribal land. And it's the complication of that. I've not seen it anywhere, and I've looked at tribes back east where you have it because the liability issue, who's going to supervise, and the difference of philosophy in policing between municipalities, government, and the federal entity. Sorry.
Thank you for your answers, guys. That's all the questions I have.
So David, this is Greg Thornton. I just, one of the issues that you brought up in the guidance that you gave the city with regards to contracting with the tribe is there's no case law. There's nothing been really challenged in the courts yet because there's no agreements in place. So the center would definitely be out there as the test agency that would be venturing into something like this that would be brand new. And again, the center is such a small jurisdiction with such limited resources. I just can't imagine that the city would want to take on that risk to be the test agency for contracting with a sovereign nation or a tribal nation.
Well, your tribal association on a federal level would be the defense in that case.
Yeah, it would be.
Because the tribe is financed to a large degree by the Mohicans, which is East Coast.
Yeah.
So if you went against if something came up that the tribe was the other party, they're going to bring in the federal group of the tribal relations to represent. And that would be who you're fighting. And they have a lot of money. So that would be the issue.
Well, the Cowlitz tribe wants to be, and they are certified now as a general authority law enforcement agency, and they're working towards having that full service law enforcement capacity. Right now, they just don't have the records unit and things like that. So obviously, it's dangerous to be the test case and the first city to try anything. I think where, as far as law enforcement services, that department wants to be a general authority, legitimate Washington state law enforcement agency. However, if something went wrong, it wouldn't be with the police department that the attorneys would be fighting. It would be with the tribal council and whoever is helping bankroll them, as Janice said, back east, and their attorneys and legal staff. So, as far as the agency goes, it looked like a really good option, and it may even help them become that full service general authority department. But again, if something went wrong, they would be completely out of the picture, and it would leave the city of La Center and the tribal council to deal with it. And I think we would end up holding the bag on that.
Yeah, they've made a lot of progress in the 40 years I've been around tribal policing. They've made a lot of progress. They didn't even used to send their people to the academy, and now they do, but they're not there yet by a long shot. So they don't have the investigative systems and that type of thing.
Okay. Okay, any other questions for Mr. Force here, why we have him online?
Thank you for your answers, David. Appreciate it.
Okay, David, yes, thank you very much for your work.
And if any questions come up, I am around, and I think the mayor knows how to get in touch with me. So if you have any questions that come up, feel free to give us a call, and we'll see what we can do. Okay?
Very good. Thank you again. Have a great evening.
Thank you. You too.
Okay, so we do have one more component to this work session this evening, and that's going to be Jeff Swanson. He does have some data I think you want to share with the council. I understand that we're going to be able to do that remotely.
It's his flashers.
It's got to be a turn signal or flashers, yeah.
Oh, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Oh, we can hear you.
Matt, we're used.
Y'all can hear me okay?
Hear you
Yes.
fine, Jeff.
Okay. And Maria, do you have the slide deck up?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, we're getting it. All right.
All right.
So I think I can see it on the TV there in the corner. So what I'm going to talk about is the budget for general government. And so if you can go to the second slide. So what we're going to cover what is general government, how is general government funded, talk a little bit about budgeting fundamentals, and go through some numbers. Next slide. So what is general government? Well, general government is police, fire, parks and recreation, streets, building and planning, libraries, and administration like central services, IT, finance, HR, and so forth. Versus enterprise funds, which are the separate businesses that cities are in, like water, wastewater, stormwater, garbage collection. There's only one city around that I'm aware of that's in garbage collection, and that's Camas, but that is an enterprise in that jurisdiction. Next slide. So how is general government funded? There are general revenues like property tax, retail sales and use tax, utility excise tax, and gambling tax. And then there are non-tax revenues like fees for licenses and permits, intergovernmental revenues, charges for goods and services, and fines and penalties. On the intergovernmental revenues, just a note on that, those are things like, you get to do an overhead allocation to your enterprise fund. So the general fund can bill and be reimbursed for providing services to your utilities, services like IT, HR, and so on, finance, etc. So you can put a proportion of those expenses into your utility rates and recover them in the general fund. On non-tax revenues, I have a little asterisk there. Non-tax revenues are to be proportionate to the cost of rendering the service provided. So like we can't make building and planning a profit center. We need to charge fees that are commensurate with the cost to provide those services. And so periodically we will look at what the cost for services are in different areas of our fees and permits, and we'll update those. There are also special revenues and restricted funds that can support general government activities. And remember those general government activities, things like streets is probably the clearest example of this, where we can fund a portion of our streets program through gas tax, for example. We could enact a transportation benefit district and generate revenue that can go to our streets and can only be used on streets, but it relieves the general fund of the burden of delivering that portion of the cost. There's a public safety sales tax enacted countywide, and all the cities, I believe, have opted into that. And so it generates, I believe, 0.1% on retail sales, and that goes towards public safety. I mentioned transportation benefit district. I'm not aware of any metropolitan parks districts in the county. I think maybe we had one between the county and the city of Vancouver at one time. But that's a way to relieve the general fund of some of the burden of delivering services in parks and recreation. And then you can vote in an excess property tax levy for capital items like building fire stations or building a new police station, or city administrative facilities, public works facilities, and so on. So things to remember: one fund cannot benefit another. You can't gift public funds. So if you have, say, something going on with the school district, even though they're a public entity, their funds are separate from our funds, and so one cannot benefit the other. So we need to assess each other the appropriate, fees and so on to provide services for the other entity. There are lots of different kinds of revenues, lots and lots that you can enact, and I have a slide on this that'll be coming up. But there are a few that can be used discretionarily with the highest degree of discretion, and those are property tax, sales tax, and utility tax. La Center has gambling tax, which is also a big portion of its general fund revenues, which you'll also see. So next slide. So some budgeting fundamentals. It's good to establish priorities and how you spend your funds. And so in terms of doing that, you need to think about how do we determine what's important relative to other needs that the city has. So a lot of things are critical. They're life, safety, property, essential services. They can be impacted by deferred investment. So sometimes something's not a critical need, but it hasn't been planned for, and you have some kind of system failure going on, like a facility that's quasi uninhabitable, a fire station, or some other issue that impairs the ability to deliver services, or creates some kind of liability and needs to be addressed. That would be a critical or urgent need. There are areas of spend which are compliance related. So these are areas where we're regulated. Different kinds of discharge permits, for example, maintaining those, or being in compliance with the Growth Management Act with our planning practices or shorelines. We need to spend resources to toe the line on state and federal regulations, and these are non-discretionary areas of spend. And then there are areas that are risk management. These are related to loss prevention and exposure mitigation, and these are generally non-discretionary. By not allocating resources to those items, you are essentially accepting an elevated level of risk. And then you have this small little sliver of whatever's left after all that spending, and that is discretionary. Another way to think about framing up budget priorities is maintaining existing services and assets versus enhancements. So in a lot of cases, jurisdictions don't keep up with growth, and they don't keep up with entropy. And so a lot of times the capacity investments in facilities and staffing are needed because you're servicing a larger population, but you still have the same staffing level or same base of facilities and equipment to deliver the services as you did when you had half the population. And that's not ideal. And then, of course, entropy or attrition-related investment needs happen with both capital facilities and with staffing. Another way to prioritize spending is based on community priorities. So you hear a lot from the public on different areas of concern, and so you prioritize based on what you're hearing from the community as well. And you set those priorities in balance with all these different bits of information as you go through the budget process. So in terms of strategies, how do you fund all the stuff or maximize the spend that you have in your budget power, your purchasing power through your budget? You look at your budget capacity, and oftentimes this involves an assessment of reserve policies. So looking at how you because the role of a reserve account is not to just sock away cash, but it's to prepare for certain risks and volatility that can happen economically speaking, that can affect revenue streams. But once you've kind of established that reserve threshold, if you accumulate above that, then you're not putting resources on the street in terms of service delivery. So having a sensible reserve policy is essential to this process. You can reallocate. That means that something goes undone so something else can get done. You can look at your debt capacity. That often involves looking at what your ability to repay is. Something I've talked about a lot in the past, and I don't know if I've talked about this since the new council members have been on, but aligning one-time revenues and one-time expenses and aligning ongoing revenues and ongoing expenses. And so one-time revenues are things like, big bunch of revenue from issuing permits for development because you had a bunch of projects that hit that stage of development, or construction-related sales tax when they got constructed. One-time expenses are things like capital facilities, replacement of fleet, ongoing revenues, which is most jurisdictions, because we're in the service business, most of our revenues and expenses are expenses anyway are related to personnel and service delivery. And the ongoing revenues are things like property tax, which you can take the 1% increase on an annual basis, sales tax, and utility excise tax. And council sets the utility excise tax rates for the most part. Some of those are set in statute for different kinds of utilities. So thinking about variable versus fixed expenses, and this is just basic business finance stuff where you can really leverage yourself up with a lot of fixed cost. And then if your activity level drops out, you still have to support that base of fixed cost, and that results in bankruptcy in some cases for businesses. The term that you hear there is over leveraged. And so, it's if you can align certain activities, business activities, with a revenue associated with that activity, then that's ideal. I think the best example in the center of this is our contract with WSP, where the work of that organization, of Ethan Spoo and the staff at WSP, is directly, for the most part, directly related to a development project, and the cost that the city incurs to review that development is reimbursed by the applicant. And so there's no fixed cost burden there to maintain if there was no permit application. So then you have revenue options. Some are voted, some are non-voted. There are some that are enterprise related You have impact fees and system development charges. And the idea is to relieve the burden on the general fund through supplantation. You can create enterprises and use restricted revenue sources to do this. And the stormwater utility in La Center is an example of this. It was enacted fairly recently, and it was done so to take the costs of maintaining the stormwater infrastructure off of the general fund and free up general fund resources for other general government activities. So I'm going to go to the next slide. And so on this slide, these are the revenue options I referred to. And so you have council authorized revenue options, 1% property tax levy, you have use of reserves, excess reserves, you have your reserve fund interest that's generated. You can do expense reduction. You can do intergovernmental transfers. This is like the wastewater treatment plant repaying the general fund for the capital loan from the general fund. You have fees. You can set the fees. You can enact a local business and occupation tax. And then utility taxes on garbage, stormwater, cable TV, water, sewer, in terms of those utilities. Leasehold excise tax, business license fees, and then on the transportation benefit district, you can enact a councilmatic $20 annual tab fee. On the voter authorized side, I'll just kind of continue talking about the transportation benefit district. Any fee enacted that's greater than $20 requires a vote. There's also a component to the transportation benefit district, which is sales tax related. And I believe it's 0.2% sales tax that can go for streets. You can do a property tax levy lid lift and generate some additional revenue. And then there are electricity, telephone, and natural gas utility taxes that can be enacted by voters. And then the public safety sales tax is voted. Affordable housing sales tax is voted. You can do an arts, sciences, and culture sales tax to fund those activities. And then a Metropolitan Parks District property tax to cover parks and rec expenditures. And then you can do a vote, like I mentioned earlier, on excess property tax levy to cover major capital expenditures. Usually facilities fall in this. So before I go on and get into the numbers, are there any questions at this point?
Do we have a gas tax currently?
The state does. And so we receive funds, our local distribution of gas tax revenues from the state.
Hey, Jeff, this is Casey. Is the correction in the fee structure that we approved here not too long ago, is there any projection on when we'll actually see the benefits of that?
Yeah, I think you'll see it. I mean, as soon as the fees go into effect, which I believe that I think the 30 days has passed and they should be in effect now. I'm trying to remember back to when we did that.
It'll be on Monday will be our first day with those fees.
Okay.
Not quite 30
So yeah,
days.
it will improve our cost recovery for the activities associated with those fees. Any other questions? Okay, let's get into some of the numbers.
Question real quick. Is it on?
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
I have a quick question on the stormwater utility tax that we currently have. Is that on each tax parcel, or is it each building on tax parcels?
No, I believe it's on each parcel, and the way it's calculated is based on the impervious surface area on each parcel. And I'm not an engineer, so I can't necessarily speak too articulately to this, but you think about areas of rooftop, parking lots, paving, concrete, even gravel. Those all generate runoff, which goes into the stormwater system in some cases, although some properties do manage to capture and treat a majority of their stormwater on site. But it also covers the public system. You think about all of our roads and infrastructure that's available for the public to use. Those generate stormwater, and that stormwater requires management. And it also funds our street sweeping activities. So pays for the sweeper, pays for the cost to run the sweeper, and so forth.
Okay, so it's per tax parcel. So if there's a house, if somebody has, property and they have a house and they have a barn and they have a huge shop and they're not paying stormwater on each building, they're just paying it on the actual property.
Counselor Fox.
Yeah,
Is that right?
So,
yeah, it's the size of the, oh, go ahead.
Jeff, Brian's got some comments he has here too, Jeff.
Hopefully this
Give
mic
you a
is
little
working.
break.
But so for single family residential properties, it's a fixed fee of 1 ERU. For commercial properties, there is an ERU, which is a square foot impervious surface, like Mr. Swanson was mentioning, equivalent. So depending on how much parking lot, roof area, etc. For commercial properties and similar, you'd be billed a higher amount. But for single family residence, whether you have 5,000 square feet or 10,000 square feet, it's all the same rate.
So is it directly related to the zoning that's on the map?
Yeah, as far as residential versus commercial / industrial, yes.
Okay, so if on my property I'm being charged 2 different stormwaters, then I get to come back and retain that money from the city?
So on as your home, you should only be being charged 1 ERU.
I've been charged 2 stormwaters for the last, I don't know, since you guys started it. So on my residential home and the building on my property. So that's something we need to discuss.
Okay.
Any additional questions before I go on? Okay. So let's go to the next slide then. Should be a pie chart. And this shows you, in terms of the revenues that flow into the general fund, you can see all the different categories of revenues. And you see for, the bigger slices of the pie, this is just for 2021. I mean, it varies, and I'll show you that there's some volatility in these different revenue streams from year to year. But just looking at last year, property taxes, sales taxes, card room revenues, and intergovernmental revenues were the largest areas of city revenues, and then licenses and permits, utility excise tax, and other resources. If we go to the next slide. This slide, and I apologize for all of the, spreadsheety stuff. I know not all of us like to look at spreadsheets, but what you have here is you have some prior year information. The yellow is our current year, so that's budget information, and then a forecast. And so what you're looking at are the prior year percentage change for these different revenue streams and some forecast assumptions, because the last slide in this deck is a forecast. And so I would draw your attention in particular. You can see like the fourth line down is utility excise taxes. And you can see year over year from 2017 to 2018, a 10,000% increase in that revenue stream. Well, that's when the stormwater utility was instituted, right? So then you see an adjustment the following year was down 41.5%, and then down another 4%, and then up about 7%, right? So it's kind of modulating over time for various reasons, right? It's new, and so there's error correction going on. There's also new development activity, so it's generating some additional ERUs and so forth. Draw your attention to that second line down, which is retail sales and use taxes. And this is a big bucket that covers everything from the, retail sales tax that you pay on your Amazon packages, because it's destination sales tax now, to, you know, if you go to one of the local shops there and buy some stuff and they charge you sales tax, that shows up here. If you build a middle school and you have construction related sales tax, that also shows up here. So you see 2015, 2016 was up 95%. The following year, 10%, then down 32%, down 2.5%, up 83%, up 61%. Forecast for this year is down 48%. So it's a very volatile stream of revenue. And you see going into the future years, we're just going to use a flat line assumption of 5% revenue growth. So it's a very difficult revenue stream to try to forecast. Card room taxes. So that is the 5th row down. You can see 15 to 16 went up 16.8%. 16 to 17, which is the year A opened, it was down 25%, down an additional 44% the following year. And then in preceding years, you see 2020 dropped off substantially. That was COVID related. In 2021, it was up 146%, also COVID related. So just giving you an idea about these revenue streams, a lot of them are very up and down from year to year. There's a lot of different activities going on in there. And so you see, looking out into 2023 and beyond, we've used some pretty conservative assumptions, but they're reasonable. And that'll help us with our forecast. So if we go down to the next slide, and you should be looking at now the actual figures. And I've highlighted in green, those are the large areas of revenue category. So property taxes in 2021, for example, were over $540,000. If you look at that next line down, the retail sales and use taxes, you see in 2021 it was almost $1 million in retail sales and use taxes, where, you know, 2019 it was a little over $300,000. And so you see that's where a big construction project comes in. So this gets to the point, I mean, I'm showing you all these numbers and trying to get to the point of ongoing revenues and ongoing expenses, and trying to align those personnel costs in particular, because that's the biggest area of spend, with those, with property tax revenue generation, utility tax revenue generation, and other revenue streams that are relatively stable. And one of the things we need to do is we need to drill into that sales tax line and decompose that. And Maria's going to get some information from the Department of Revenue to help us do that, so we can figure out what is kind of our baseline of ongoing sales tax revenue generation that we can count on. So we'll try to like pull out those one-time generators of sales tax revenue. You see 5th line down, card room taxes. 2016 looks like the peak year at 3.1 million. The following year was 2.3 million. The year after that, 2018, is 1.3 million. And so you see there's been a precipitous decline in that source of revenues, and it's a big slice of the pie. So any other questions on revenue side before I move on to expenses? Okay, hearing none. Let's go to the next slide, please. Should be looking at a pie chart of general fund expense composition. And so you see we have 3 major areas of expense: salaries, benefits, and services. And on the services side, that's essentially what I was referring to earlier with like WSP and other consultants that deliver services on behalf of the city. Some are very transactional in nature, some are ongoing in nature, but that's how the city avails itself of those services. And so,
Jeff,
yeah.
I want to add something. Services is not just those things. It's also our AWC insurance, our IT, our utility bills, so all the CPU and everything, all of those, that also falls under services operations.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for the clarification there. And so if we go to the next slide, similar to the last one, this shows you the prior year percentage change and also the forecast assumptions. And so if you look at the salary line there, it's the top one, you can see year over year change declined 15 to 16 and 16 to 17, went up a little bit, went down a little bit, up a little bit, went down pretty significantly. And then 2022 budget, we're accounting for a fully staffed police department. And so that line goes up. Benefits side, you see kind of tracks fairly similarly. And then on services, you see 15 to 16 was up about 8%, up again about 38%, up again 38%, and then only up about 9.5%, and so on. And a lot of those services, again, the volatility and that expense side is largely related to our development patterns. So any questions? I think I was going to go, yeah, let's go to the next slide. And you can see here again are the numbers, salary, benefits, and services being the largest chunks of the pie. And you're looking at the strict numbers there. So 2021, for example, salaries were 1.66 million, benefits were about $500,000, services were just shy of 1.4 million. And you can see kind of what the data series does over time there in terms of how it rises and falls. The next one, if we go to the next slide, it's a breakdown by department of general fund expenses. And so you can see like the big chunks of that pie, finance department in the blue at the top, the royal blue, I guess we'll call it, police department in the gray, planning department in the lighter blue, and public works operations in the dark blue there. Okay, any questions at this point about expenses? I have one more slide and it's the forecast. Okay, seeing, hearing none. Next slide, please. And this is the forecast. So the bars are your reserves, general fund reserves, those reserve balances. The orange line is your total revenue. The gray line is your total expense. And so you can see that in the forecast period, the blue bars start pointing down, and that represents deficit. That's the ending reserves in 2023 are projected using the assumptions I showed you earlier to be 1.1, almost 1.2 million in the hole, and it gets worse from there. And that's because we use those reserves to shore up the deficit in the general fund in the forecast. The ongoing revenues and the projected one-time revenues are insufficient to cover our cost of service delivery. And so this is really kind of the crux of all the data that we just walked through in the prior slides. Again, it's making assumptions about how expenses are going to grow or not grow, or how revenues are going to grow or not grow in the upcoming years. And so that is my last slide in the deck. Happy to take any questions on this.
One slide. Sorry, one more. We'll get there. Real quick, Jeff, I see your numbers there under salary for 2021 and then 2022. There's an increase of almost 400,000 there. just in salaries. Can anyone explain that?
That would be because we didn't have a fully funded police department. No.
The expense is now 2 million for 2022, but it says it's at 1.6 for 2021. That's what I was wondering.
Yeah, and 2021 and
All of our-
before are actuals. So in these forecast models, the 2021 and before years are actual figures. 2022 is the budget figure. That's for this year because, you know, we're still in this year. And 2023 and beyond are forecast. It's our best guess.
Okay. Yeah, that helps me. Thank you.
Yep. Other questions? Okay, so I think, you know, from a standpoint of sound financial management, the upshot here is to address the deficit. You have to change the curve on those lines. And so there are a number of ways to do that. Expense reduction, stabilizing expenses is part of it. And consistent with the police discussion tonight, I think, you know, staff are trying to find the best options, any and all available options to deliver the service, for one, given the environment that we're in, but also to do it in a manner that's budgetarily sustainable. And apologize for the road noise going on around me.
Just stay safe.
So, yeah, any additional questions or discussion? I think what we're hoping to get to is some direction on, in terms of the law enforcement service delivery, what the best options are going forward. You know, that mitigate the city's risk to the greatest extent possible. And so I think time is, you know, here's where council has some time to talk this through. And obviously we could go back to that slide with all the revenue options, and we can pull some of those levers too to try to change the shape of those curves and try to get some of those blue bars smiling instead of frowning.
Can you explain what I saw on one of the slides back is a B&O tax? I mean, obviously businesses already have to pay a B&O tax to the state, but what does that change for the city?
Yeah, so there's a local option.
Yeah, these are for services that don't require a sales tax, right? So
yeah, I'm not, I think it's broadly applicable to all businesses. So just like a business pays B&O tax to the state, there would be a local portion added on to that that would go to the city.
okay, have you looked at proportionally how many, I mean, right off the bat, I mean, any legal services, tax services, Teresa's little school tutoring, I mean, she takes up a big space. I mean, Gold Star Tutoring isn't here anymore, but that would have been an option. But maybe look at those services to see like what that would look like.
Well, it would be something that would be collected by the state. So if council enacted that, I mean, we would work with Department of Revenue and we would bring you some forecasts of based on the state's collection. Does that make sense?
So B&O tax is business and occupation tax, and all that's a state tax. That's all businesses in Washington state pay right now. The city could add a small percentage in addition to what the state requirements already are in B&O tax. And I don't know that it would be based on square footage or anything like that. It would just be based upon what your revenue streams are. But it would be a very small additional general fund revenue source for the city if the city was to explore something like that, because we have so few businesses in the city.
Right, and I think it's better than increasing sales tax. I mean,
Well,
yeah,
sales
People
tax
don't
would
wanna-
be,
people don't want to see that, yeah.
right. Well, that would be levied against the entire population of the city, where B&O tax would just be on the businesses of the city. And, yeah. And our businesses already pay a pretty high tax rate.
Yeah, and with any of those, with any of those revenue options, what we would do is if council wanted to consider enacting one of those, is we would do some research again and figure out how much would that generate and how much of a benefit it is to the financial picture for the city. So, you can get a sense of how many revenue options you would need to enact to correct the budget deficits.
Did we ever get an answer from Woodland Police about taking over? Is that going to-
Yes, we have had discussions. I sat down with the mayor and the police chief a couple of weeks ago. They wanted to put together some type of draft proposal and give it back to us. We've also continued our discussions with Ridgefield, the city of Ridgefield, the Cowlitz. We've always had ongoing discussions, and they're at different stages just to keep interest going. One of the things that we wanted to do, and I know we have to have this frank conversation eventually, and I guess I'll be the guy that'll bring it out. If you look at the way the recruitment staffing issue is now in the country and locally, if you look at the economy and what may happen in the next 6 or 12 months with the housing and everything else, and if you look at the fact that we don't have the budget to have a sustained police department for the next 5 or 6 years, because my recommendation is we'd like to get some consensus from council to say, hey, we know we can't afford a police department right now. And yes, we would like to go out and look at our contract options and my recommendation would be we do a 5-year contract with a potential for a 5-year renewal, but both parties would have to agree to the renewal. And in that 5-year period, then we could start having discussions about, okay, how can we raise more revenue? How can we entice more development into the city? Because those are all going to take time. And part of the hard part for me, and even dealing with the other cities, is the cities all know what everybody's campaign promise was. But campaign promises and reality can be two different things, because once you get in a position, you start looking at the numbers, you go, hey, we really can't afford this right now. So it would be nice to get some consensus from the council that says, hey, as of today, we know we can't bring back the police department that everybody wants. So let's contract out. In that 5-year window, will give, number one, it gives us enough time as a city working, we get additional revenue streams, but it also gives the people that we're going to contract out with the ability to hire staff and ramp up. And then at the end of the 5 years, most of these cities that we decide we don't want to play anymore, they'll have enough growth that they can absorb those bodies back into their agencies. And so that's the conversation that I'd love to have.
The confusion I have right now is because before the new council members came in, that direction was given. And what was brought back was the Clark County Sheriff's, right? And then come to find out they're not going to be able to do it. It's just not going to happen for quite a while.
Sure, okay.
So, but my confusion is I agree with you. We have to have some direction here. But we're also not being presented everything, except for now we know that the tribe is probably out, right? And then you're telling me now that the ongoing conversations with Ridgefield are still happening, and Woodland is presenting or wanting to present some sort of a draft to you guys. Until we see some of that, how do we know what direction to go in?
Well, I can tell you right now, you're getting the cart before the horse. We know that we can't afford a police department right now. I mean, if you look at the numbers and look at the revenue stream, look at how much money it's going to take to recruit people, and we can talk about that more in a second. We're never going to get there within the next 3 or 4 years. I mean, and that's if the housing bubble breaks and all of a sudden home sales go down, and people aren't selling houses and we're not getting all that revenue, that's even going to hurt us even more. but we need some kind of consensus from the council, because these other cities, they're not going to put a lot of effort into putting together any numbers or anything if they don't think the council's serious. Because the worst thing that could happen is we come back to the council and then they say, and you go, well, we looked at this, but we really just like to have our own police department anyway. Now, as far as why we're bringing back other options now, remember, up till the end of November, the sheriff's department was the person, right? And then at the last council meeting in November, they backed out. Well, then we had to wait for the new council to come on, because we couldn't have gotten anything to the old council in that 30-day window. So when the new council came on, and we've had dozens of, it seems like dozens, but we've had several discussions about what about the Cowlitz, what about Woodland. We've gone back at your direction and had those conversations. So that's why we have, and we also wanted to bring back, let's bring in John Walters, let's look at the risk mitigation for these different ideas that everybody's come up with, and then come back to this workshop and say, okay, we've presented about everything we can, including financial forecast, and now it's time for us to go, okay, I think we have to get away from, because I hear it almost every council meeting when we talk about the police department, about ramping the police department back up. And I don't think it's not going to happen. I mean, it's not going to happen overnight. And it's certainly the worst thing that happens if we ramp the police department back up and we never get any additional revenue streams, then we're just back where we were 3 or 4 years from now, and we're laying people back off again. And it also sends a message to our potential employees. They're kind of waiting to see, okay, what's going on with the center, because nobody wants to come here and bring their families here, and all of a sudden we're laying people off again. So that's another driver. And then another driver we built into this, if you remember, when we put the budget together, Ridgefield was offering a $20,000 hiring bonus. And so we put a $25,000 hiring bonus in our budget. Well, Battlegrounds just come down and they've done a $30,000 hiring bonus. And now the talk is Vancouver's going to go to a $35,000 hiring bonus. We can't compete with those agencies.
What was the budget that we put together for the bonuses? I know that was
25,000.
25.
Yeah, the other issue here is Ridgefield was not interested. The police chief was interested. The council was not interested. Okay.
Yeah, so.
And the union said no. So that's the other problem. It's all about timing, folks. Now Ridgefield's reconsidering.
And the reason they're reconsidering, and it was a good play by the police chief, in the sense that he is looking at North County, and they are pretty much fully staffed. Yet he knows that, hey, we're understaffed and the sheriff's department is understaffed. So if there's an emergency, they're going to be the ones who are going to be first responders to everything. So he started thinking, well, if we're going to start responding to the center and unincorporated county and handling priority calls, we might as well have a contract and get more staffing. And that, to me, makes sense. So that's kind of where we are. And it doesn't mean, and don't get me wrong, just like I said, and I've been saying for a year and a half, that, hey, when we did the assessment, we all agreed that it would be nice to have your own police department if you can afford it. I mean, we all agree to that. But as of today's environment, that's not possible. And I think we need to make that decision and realize that, and then work, like I said, let's get a contract with an agency so we have consistent police coverage for what we can afford. And that may be one of the conversations we had with Woodland, is either 24-hour patrol coverage, or maybe we only can afford 20-hour patrol coverage, but then it's 4 hours of emergency response for anything. So those are all things we have to look at.
I'm just having a hard time when you keep saying that we can't afford our own police department, but we can go out and afford to contract police.
Well,
right? And now you bring up the fact that we're going to do 20 hours instead of 24. That, I know it's hypothetical and it's an example, right? Okay, so what's the difference of going after our own police force and maybe not doing a full 9 officers and doing 5 officers and having our own that answer to the residents of the center and still pay out that same amount, right? If it's possible.
Still locked into our current contract.
Okay.
And the salaries and benefits are going to continue to go up.
Right.
And you saw the blue.
But that's still going to happen under.
And
a contractor still paid for all of those
with the current contract.
But that's still going to happen if we contract out that they're
Not
going to have.
necessarily our contract, because we're paying full benefits, not only for the officers, but the full family.
Right.
We've got
All the equipment.
all of the,
training.
I mean, we've got
A police chief's
one of-
$200,000 for the
So
city.
that's exactly it. There's efficiencies when you contract with another agency. Okay, so just in the case of La Center, if we were to contract out police services and we were to contract with another agency, that other agency would have a chief, they would have a sergeant, they would have their HR component for operating that police department. They would incur all those costs. The city of La Center may have to pay a proportion of those costs, but we're not paying 100% of those costs. So there's some efficiencies there that both the agency that would be providing the service as well as the city of La Center would be able to enjoy. That's the whole concept with contracting.
Sure.
Where La Center goes on our own, we have to start off by having our own police chief, and we have to have supervisory staff, and we have to have the field training officers that'll be able to train new officers if and when we could ever hire any, which would be a real challenge for La Center right now. And so that's the whole concept behind contracting out, whether you went with CCSO or whether you go with another agency. But with Chief Richardson, where it gets so frustrating from the city's perspective, the city of La Center's perspective, is each one of these agencies have their own issues and challenges to work with. For instance, Woodland, they're in a different county. They have a totally different operational system. Operationally, it would be very difficult for La Center and Woodland to actually share police services because of those types of issues. And we haven't heard back from Woodland. And again, it's something that Woodland would have to work out, not the city of La Center. That's something that they would have to come back to us with. And again, if it doesn't make sense for Woodland, it's not going to make sense for La Center, and we're not going to be able to put some kind of a deal together.
We just need to see some numbers, right? To
Yeah.
have a comparison at that point.
What about Battleground Police Force?
One of the issues we have here, and excuse me, Chief, but first of all, we don't operate in a bubble here. I mean, all of you ran campaigns and all of you were pretty vocal with what you thought would be the best alternative for La Center with having our own police department versus contracting out. Other cities know that. And it's very difficult when the message from the La Center City Council is that, hey, we're going to have our own police department and we're not interested in contracting out. I mean, that happened with CCSO. That's one of the reasons why Sheriff Atkins put the brakes on, because he says, well, we're not going to pursue this and do all our due diligence and in earnest with the city of La Center only for them. And I mean, we haven't even got into the part of actually sitting down and negotiating a contract with anyone where the attorneys get involved and we actually start putting the contracts together. That's a huge commitment in time and expense for not just the city of La Center, but it's going to be for the agency that we contract with. And if the message coming from this body right here is that we're not going to do it, they're not going to invest the time or the energy. I think what the chief is asking for and what the city is asking for is we need a commitment from the council up front that, hey, look, we've had our discussion on what the risk assessment is for contracting out with some of these agencies. We've looked at the financial models and we see what the financial challenges are for the city of La Center. We see what some of the operational issues are for the city of La Center. And again, as the chief just laid out, short term, it's going to be a challenge for La Center to put anything together, but it's going to be particularly a challenge for us to stand up our own police department. And if the city was to start that process now, and 3 or 4 or 5 years from now, we only find out that we're in a worse situation than we are now, that's going to be a lot of time wasted and a lot of money wasted. So I think what the chief is asking for and what the city is asking for is, I get the point where what you're saying, Councilmember Strobin, is that you have to see the numbers. We're not going to get good numbers from another agency, from another city, unless the message from this body is we want to contract out. And that message is going to have to not just go out to the city, but it's going to require council members to talk to council members in our neighboring city. you're going to have to give them the confidence that say, yep, this is something that we think would be beneficial for not just our city, but your city as well. We have to give that to the council, our neighboring councils, the satisfaction that, that this is something that the city is supporting and that it can be a mutually beneficial for both cities. And I think there's council members in our adjoining cities that would love to have those kinds of conversations with our council members. And, one of the reasons why we're getting the services we are right now from some of these other agencies is because La Center has, and you're all new council members, but we have great relationships with our neighboring cities. La Center and Richfield has worked collaboratively for years. It wasn't that many years ago that Richfield was in the same position that La Center was in. La Center was way better off financially, and there was a period of time when La Center really did what Richfield is doing for us on a very similar basis. They weren't able to field a full 24/7 operating police department, and La Center helped them out. And there's, there is that relationship, and there is that understanding between our cities. But that's starting to grow thin, and we have to, again, make a, we can't make a decision here tonight because it's a work session, but we can surely give the city staff some direction as to, okay, this is what we want to pursue, and this is what we need to do, and then be supportive of the city once we make that decision. We can't say, well, we're going to pursue this and then have, the center and another agency do all the work on the contracts, work on the proposals, work on the numbers, work on the HR component, only to come back and say, well, we don't want to do that. And I think we have enough information in front of us, given what the financial forecast is, what the risk assessment is, as far as what was presented by the attorneys tonight, and also, what the challenges are that Mr. Walters explained to us as far as hiring and retaining police officers in the state of Washington right now. So,
Hey, Mayor Thornton?
Have a discussion more in depth about those very issues, but again, I think it's going to have to come from this body, and it's going to have to get on to the general public that this is what we want to do.
Hey, Mayor Thornton?
Yes.
So one area of expense that we haven't really talked about with respect to the police department in this discussion tonight is the capital need, in particular as it relates to the building. And so, I think there's that capital obligation that needs to be addressed in addition to sort of the ongoing costs of running a department. So if we decide that we're going to buckle up and we're going to run our own department, then, the budget figures that you're seeing for this year would need to be, increased as we pursue property development and so on to construct a proper police station. So,
Jeff, and they were going to use it, so I don't understand the fact of that, but your point is well taken. No,
yeah, I think
I got a conversation back from Chief Richardson was that they would be using.
Well, they'd be working out of it, but right. I think that's different. They still use their locker facilities. They would still go down for their briefings down there. They would come here, do report writing and stuff like that. And I think that's different than having your full-time established police department in the city. I mean, if we hired, again, it goes back to the whole thing. We hired a female police officers. We don't have female facilities for them. And so we're going to have to build those. And, it's going to be very expensive to retrofit a 50-year-old building. You have to bring it up to current standards. And so that's something we have to think about. I mean,
sure.
So, it's
anywhere it's going to cost money, right?
Well, yeah, but it costs more probably to rehab that building and bring it up than it would to tear it down.
We can put changing rooms downstairs. My understanding, that's not even being used.
So the issue with the downstairs of the city hall is, we went through design. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Jeff. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, so I was just saying, when we were doing the design for the tenant improvements there at City Hall, we went pretty far down the road of putting the police department down on the lower level. The issue is the building is built to what's called a Category 2 standard, and it would need to be upgraded to a Category 4 standard. That's for seismic reasons, for like snow load and wind shear and all kinds of, you want your essential facilities, your fire stations, your police stations to be constructed to a higher standard. And so what we learned was, in order to bring that structure up to category 4, we would essentially have to dismantle the roof and drive pile down and create a more robust foundation to make that happen. It was like just throwing a lot of money after something that's not even worth that much. So yeah, I think the idea behind contracting was economies of scale, of sharing resources, of not being entirely reliant on having to go it alone.
Can I interrupt you for just a second?
Yeah, and I actually have my roadside help has just showed up. So
very good. I would like to throw out that, well, I'm not a fan of talking in circles, and I think we've really been talking in circles about this whole issue since before we even became part of this council. And what are we? We're at the end of April right now, and I think
Excuse me, Casey, could you explain to me when you say talking in circles before you became council members?
Well, the conversation has been, what are we going to do with the police department? And we talk about the shortage of funds. And I don't know, this is, I think, the third or fourth time that we've talked about the inadequacy of the current police building. So I think what we've been missing this whole time is the conversation that we had earlier. Chief Richardson and I have had a couple of conversations, and Mayor, you and I have had conversations about what it is that we need to do. And when the chief asks, well, we need some sort of consensus from the council, we really haven't been provided with any information or any viable decisions to say, yeah, let's chase that particular lead. Everything's been what we can't do or what won't work out, right? So I think the talk that you just gave, Mayor, is exactly what we've needed to hear is, hey, let's make a decision and we'll try and work for that instead of going back and talking about all the things that we can't do or probably won't work, so that we can find out who it is that we need to talk to. So, tonight's information, I think, was really helpful based on the insurance requirements, based on the risks of entering into contract with the Cowlitz tribe. I think that, at a different date and time, a year and a half ago, maybe 5 years in the future, I think the sheriff's office would be a very good option for us, but the sheriff's office doesn't have the staffing right now. They're already losing people to the city of Vancouver and the city of Camas and the city of Richfield. So in my opinion, the hurdles that we've discussed with the city of Woodland would not be impossible to get over. They would be more of a challenge than, say, if we contracted with Richfield, but it could be done. I think that the issues that have been raised with the city of Richfield haven't really been verified. I think that the union may, in casual conversation, say that they're not interested, but the bottom line is it would only benefit them if they did. In fact, the prime example of that is the existing overtime contract that we have with them. And in fact, if you just change that one to full-time coverage and we paid the same amount of money, it would be a phenomenal deal. So since they signed that, there really isn't a reason why they shouldn't be interested in signing a full-time contract, especially if they have the staffing to do so. So the chief had recommended to me a while ago, a few weeks, that maybe council members should start having conversations with the council members in the city of Richfield. And if if that's the direction that we want to go, I'd be happy to start those conversations. But I think we were kind of not necessarily waiting, but unknowingly waiting for the conversation that we had tonight, which is, hey, let's help focus a direction for our chief to go and start working out these contracts, or at least get a firm commitment that yes, we're willing to sit in a room during a meeting and actually start putting together some of these numbers. What would the staffing look like? Does it have to be 24-hour coverage initially? Maybe not, but we still have the mutual aid and they would respond as needed. So, but the contract that the chief has put together for the voluntary overtime coverage is in my mind, a phenomenal contract, and it wouldn't take very much to expand that to full-time coverage.
And our office
I don't,
would be
I don't,
there.
yeah, I don't know that that's necessarily the case, and Chief, you can address that, but the overtime contract we have is not an overtime contract with Ridgefield.
No, we do have an overtime contract. I believe it's $75 an hour.
Right. That's a special events one, right?
Yeah, that's a special event. That's for them coming in and working overtime. It's overtime for
Yeah.
them coming and working in our city. I think that it would be phenomenal if you could do that. I think the problem you have, if we had a contract with regular basic service, then their obligation is to fill those slots, either voluntary or involuntary. Where on an overtime basis, it's voluntary. So that's a little bit of a difference between the special events contract and a regular contract. But I agree with you, and I want you to know that we have recently had conversations. I know at the mayor's level with the city manager at Ridgefield, and I know the city manager's had conversations with his council. And I think that if we get some direction from council that yes, this is the direction we want to go to, I think it would be very helpful. This is just me. I'm not speaking on behalf of the mayor or anybody else. For council members here to go out and have lunch with their council members and really try and encourage this thing to move down the road. Because I think what would happen is we would purchase additional employees, additional police officers, and we would proportion out the cost based on call load. We would help fund, Ridgefield's going to go to 24-hour a day supervisor coverage. We could help pay for that. So there's things, let's say they want to have a detective, we could help pay a proportion of that. So at the end of the day, it benefits both our agencies, and there's a win. It's got to be a win-win for both of us. It's not a win if their officers come over here and just stay over here. They want to have that ability to have at least 2 officers on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So La Center would become just like another patrol area that's staffed. And so that way it would be benefit for us too, because we would always have 2 officers that could respond to calls, emergency calls. They would always have at least 2 officers on to respond to emergency calls. So I think that is the best direction. And I agree with you. Ridgefield is the way to go. The way I left it with Woodland is I says, here's the operational issues. You come back with a proposal and how you're going to fix those operational issues, because you're providing a service, right? It's not up to us to fix it. It's up to you guys to fix it. So that's my fallback. And so that's kind of where we're working right now.
Okay.
And I think, again, and I agree with you, that if we could just get let's get some direction where we're going to go. And then we can worry about the long range plan, where we're going to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, when we can figure out what's going to develop at the junction. How can we increase tax revenue in our city, those kinds of things. Because we're not going to fix that problem overnight.
It's one department though.
Yeah.
It's not that department and this department, it's one department.
It's one department.
That was the piece that was the sticking part. 2 things. One, the city council didn't want to do it a year and a half ago, and the union wanted to do it. The only person who wanted to do it was right? You have to have all of the tribe present. So in this case, if you actually contract with them, they're totally responsible liability-wise for training and staffing. And that's the benefit of going with Ridgefield. If that's and again, a year and a half ago, they didn't want to, now they want to. It is clearly
And I don't want to get too far down the road
Right.
specifically with Ridgefield either. So
No,
again,
no,
it's not like
Right.
they're looking, in the last conversation I had, there needs to be some confidence. presented from this council that, yes, that's something that the city would consider and be supportive of. If not, I don't think we're going to be able to have.
Yeah. And it's got to benefit both
discussions.
communities.
We've already
I mean,
said that.
So,
Yeah.
So
my biggest concern out of the whole thing is that we have police officers that are leaving, and we do have police officers that have stuck with us. And I know one of them for 20 years, and he's put his life on the line for the city. And for me, that means a lot, right? So that person needs to be taken care of. And that should be a priority at that point, because now we're saying, hey, your job's no longer going to be here. So for me, that's a big point that needs to be taken
Well,
care
yeah,
of
and
and
I mean,
addressed.
yeah, there's actually, we still have 2 officers in the city of Center, and that's something that, again, the chief can work out with the chief of another agency. In this environment, right now with where, as far as our officers either being part of an agreement between the 2 cities, as far as being absorbed into the next operation. First of all, our officers would want to do that. They may not want to. They may prefer to pursue alternatives somewhere else. But there's ample opportunities right now for any law enforcement officer to do a lateral or to do something. So I don't think our officers would have a problem either.
Short of an annexation, the receiving department or the contracting department isn't obligated to take anybody, but that doesn't mean we can't ask
Right.
and
I don't think it would be a problem.
help persuade them to do
Right.
so.
And they're going to have to staff up anyway. I mean, they're going to have to hire
Yeah.
people, so you might as well hire people that work here. But at the end of the day, you know, it's why we can encourage them to do that, and we can help make that path as smooth as possible. At the end of the day, you know, one of those officers is you know, within 8 months of retirement time on, so or age. So he may decide, I want to retire instead. So I don't know, you know. But
Yeah.
we've had those conversations with Richfield and Woodland about thinking about, okay, what about our employees? What do we do with our employees?
Well, I think to answer your question from earlier, Chief, is I believe this council is ready to have you go and seek out who would be interested in negotiating contracts, whether that be Richfield or Woodland or whoever. That's a discussion for another time. But I think it's obvious by the information that we were presented tonight that, well, first, we have to be responsible. We have to figure out how we're going to get revenue coming back into the city. That's nowhere near as easy as I think anybody thought that it might be for us, and it's not really our role to do that. But I do think that we have the responsibility to provide public safety, and I know that's the 3 of us put that on our mailers, which is we want to make sure that we work towards restoring confidence in public safety. And you know, in the future we may be able to try and look at rebuilding a police department, but at this point, the writing is on the wall, and there's been decisions made long before any of us had started here that after that perfect storm that John Walters was talking about, is we just don't have a choice. So what we can't keep doing is what we're doing, and it's punting it to the next meeting or the next meeting. We've got to make a decision on a direction to go towards.
Thank you for that, Casey.
Thank you.
yes, thanks, Casey. Okay.
I agree wholeheartedly that it's time for us to give the chief direction to move forward with those discussions and make progress on this issue, because we've had these bouncing ball discussions and arguments and trying to point fingers and lay blame. And in all reality, none of us sitting here have played a role into the overall demise of this police department. The police department, there were many years in which the city overspent, and that is what's tumbled us into this situation. And we can't continue in that path. We can't spend what we don't have. And it's going to take us a number of years to get that back going upwards. And I think as elected officials across the board, that's our role. And public safety is still critical and of the utmost importance for the community, but this is the best approach for us to get there.
Thank you.
But what is the best approach? I guess I'm still unclear of where we're going with this. I mean, we have decided that CCO is out, the tribe is out, and right now we're looking at Ridgefield as being the best option.
Well,
Which-
Ridgefield and Woodland would be our best two
Yeah.
options.
Woodland being the fallback, like you
Right.
said earlier. So, I mean, if that's our best option, then I think we just need to go forward with trying to pursue that. And whether that looks like a hybrid or we're going to fully contract out to them, we need options. I mean, we just can sit on
Well,
our hands all we want.
The
but-
option is going to, if I come back with a contract, it's going to be 100% a contract city with either Ridgefield or Woodland, and they take over all the policing. They take over the liability, hiring, firing, collective bargaining agreements, and we're out of the police business. We just write a check, once a month or once a year or whatever it is. And it will have benchmarks, and there's certain things that we want. We want to be able to collect our own crime stats and response times and those kinds of things, so we can look at how the contract is functioning. And so we have a benchmark to compare service to reality. And once we get that in place, and we even had conversations about how are we going to package the police cars? Can it still say La Center on it? Can it say La Center Ridgefield? Do they wear a La Center uniform, but they're not our employee? We have had all those conversations. We just need to bring it down to an operational level and then come back.
What does that mean for your position?
Well, there would be a police chief. Their police chief, let's say it was the Ridgefield police chief, and let's say he spent 20% of his time on the center stuff. We would pay 20% of his salary and benefits. They would pay 80. He would come and attend our meetings. He would be our police chief, just like he's Ridgefield's police chief. So that's the kind of thing that we do.
So it would replace your position, is what I'm saying.
Yes.
It would dissolve your position.
And it would cost you, at the end, it costs you less money because again,
right, exactly.
Even it's a lot of money for a police chief. Even a city this size, salary benefits at a car is a couple $100,000. That's a big chunk of change when you don't have it. So we're trying to do the best. We want to get the best law enforcement service for the least amount of cost. And that's what I've been saying all along. And that's where we're going to head to. But the reality is reality. At the end of the day, we have to come back with something that you guys can afford, the city can afford, and you're willing to sign off on. So it's kind of where we are.
Yeah, I was just putting that in there.
No, I understand, and we're all on the same page. Hey, at the end of the day, we want consistent staffing, patrol in the city of La Center. We want to be able to know that, hey, when we pick up the phone, we know that somebody's going to be here going to the call.
Well, it's got to be a substantial savings too, right? I mean, at that point, it can't just be a couple, $200,000-$300,000 under having our own 24-hour police coverage. Otherwise, what makes it worth going on a contract? So for me, if that's the case, I'd like to see what prices you can bring back from both the cities, and if you had to, war them against each other to get a better price. That's pretty much how contractors work. So,
well, we can look at that. The other savings though is hey, just liability. We're out of the liability business, which is the police department's the biggest liability in the city. And it only takes one person making one mistake at 3 o'clock in the morning, and you get a $50 million, $100 million judgment against you. So I agree with you. I hope we come in between 1 million and 1.1 or 2. I mean, that would be my goal in life, because that would save us $1 million, $1 million bucks, and then they have all the liability, and we can take our savings and put it away for a rainy day or put it to other things. I mean, that would be my goal.
Right, but we don't want to that's being, again, we don't know because we don't know.
The
chief hasn't really had the opportunity or been afforded the opportunity to have any of those kinds of discussions. We don't want to get into that right now, but I hope you got your question answered with regards to the hybrid. I mean, again,
I wasn't even saying the hybrid. I was just saying that, okay, we've been presented with these 3 options, and I think that as a council, we all need to come together and figure out, like you guys have been saying over and over, we've got to figure out where we're going with this. We realize that, we have the shortfall with revenue. So we know that's something that we have to look forward to if we proceed with what we're doing right now. And so obviously we got to come up with a better solution.
Right.
And right now that does seem like contracting, and we don't have anybody to contract with at this time. So
They have to know you're in play for you. So that's part of the decision making.
Well, I'm in favor of that. I really need to go. My children are home alone, so I really need to
Thank
go.
you.
Yeah, thank you.
So Mayor, what's next?
So if I'm hearing the council correctly, and I think that Councilmember Fox just agreed as well, that she's in agreement that the city needs to pursue conversation, begin the contract negotiations, the due diligence process with an adjoining agency, continue our conversations and see if we can't regenerate the opportunity or the possibility of having a contract with one of our adjoining cities, whether that's Woodland or Ridgefield or what have you. Yeah.
But it's a full-time.
As a full-time, contracting agency where the city of La Center's police department would basically be dissolved. We would have a contract with another agency. It would be, term of the contract would be somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 years. I don't think it'd be less than 5 years. And during that 5-year period, the city can continue to look at other options, either continuing the contract with that agency, looking at contracting with another agency, or standing up our own department in the
In
future.
that contract, you're going to have measurables of what you expect.
Yeah.
So that's one of the important parts about a contract, what that means, what's the time. And remember, you have 3 decades of examples in King County. So the city of Erie contracts,
Right.
King County.
Very common.
Shoreline and so forth. So you have lots of examples, but the other party has to know your secrets and you're willing to talk details. That's what the chief wants you to know. What's the deal? We're ready to talk details, and then you can bring it back. Okay.
Is everyone comfortable with that?
Yes.
Chief, do you need any more from
No,
the
I'm
council?
good. I'll be on the phone tomorrow.
Okay. So I think and again, I really appreciate the presentations we had this evening with Mr. Walters. That's something that this is the first time I had heard that. And then I do think the risk assessment that we got from RMSA. And it's their attorney,
Maria, can you send that slide deck out, please?
Yeah. So I think it's all good information, and some of it's new. So I think it's something that we all needed to hear. Okay, any other questions or discussion amongst the council members?
Thank you, everyone.
No, thank you for the meeting tonight. I've been asking for this for a while. This was a good
Yeah,
meeting.
no, I'm glad we were able to get this done, and yeah, I appreciate all your hard work too, Chief.
Maria,
I know how hard you've been working on this, and I know you will continue to do it. Appreciate it. I think we've lost Jeff, but
I'm still here.
Oh.
It wasn't my roadside assistance. It was just someone pulling up behind me to see, I'm still waiting.
So lesson learned, learn to change a tire.
You have Auto Club or Acme?
Okay, yeah, so.
Allstate.
So we'll go ahead and end the work session for this evening. Again, thank you, council, staff, for being here. Great job. Appreciate it. Have a good rest of the evening.
Try
Good luck,
that
Jeff.
Schwab next time, Jeff.